Lake Bodom is a big lake that's located in a city called Espoo in Finland. The lake attracts many tourists and locals, especially during summertime when people go there to swim, camp, or do other outside activities. On the 5th of June 1960, four teenagers decided to go camping at the Bodom Lake. But the night that was supposed to be just a fun camping night would end up being one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries in Finnish history. This is the unsolved case of the Lake Bodom murders. So hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Elin and on this channel I cover true crime cases that have occurred in the Nordic countries. I researched this case when I started the channel and I even filmed it twice, but I was never really happy with the outcome and I ended up never posting it. So I decided to do some more digging into the case and film it once again, and this is my third time filming the case. But I have been pretty excited to post this case because it actually happened pretty close to where I live and I have been to this location many times, which makes it extra creepy. Some content warnings before I start the video. This case will include talks about the murder of children, sexual assault, and suicide, and buckle up because there are a lot of suspects and theories to go through in this case. If you like my channel, please subscribe, and now let's get into the case that happened in Finland. On the 4th of June 1960, 15-year-old girls Maila and Anja and their 18-year-old boyfriends Seppo and Niels decided to camp at the Bodom Lake, which is a lake in the southern part of Finland. The lake is a beautiful, pretty big lake, and it has a camping site on the southern shores of the lake, which is also where the teenagers were camping. And sources actually state differently about this. Some sources state that the teenagers were dating, so it was believed to have been kind of like a double date. So Niels and Maila were dating and Seppo and Anja were dating. Other sources state that the group are all friends and only Niels and Maila were a couple. The teenagers set up their tent at the shore of the lake and they were fishing, swimming, drinking some alcohol and just enjoying their time outdoors. They all in all had a very good time before going to sleep at around 2 a.m. according to one of their diaries. But little did they know that only one of the teenagers would wake up the next morning alive. At around 6 a.m. the next morning, a group of people birdwatching close by saw a tent collapsed and a blonde man walking away from the scene. They were not close enough to see any details, but the tent was clearly slashed and they were pretty suspicious of this, but they ended up not checking the site any further. At around 11 in the morning, a man was swimming in the lake when he ended up finding a horrific scene. Outside of the tent, he found Maila and Niels, so the couple, covered in blood, and some sources stated that Maila was undressed from the waist down and laying on top of the tent. The man alerted the police and they soon arrived at the scene, finding Seppo and Anja dead inside of the tent. All of their bodies had been stabbed and beaten with an object, and Anja, Seppo, and Maila were all pronounced dead at the scene. Niels, however, had survived the attack even if he was severely injured. And the crime scene was very brutal, and I will insert some pictures for those of you interested, but if you don't want to see it, then just don't look at the screen right now. So the investigation showed that sometime between 4 and 6 a.m. during the early morning hours of Sunday, Maila, Anja, and Seppo were all brutally stabbed and bludgeoned to death by an unknown person. They were killed by stabbing and blunt force trauma to their heads, most likely while sleeping inside of the tent, so this suggests that Maila was then dragged out of the tent afterwards. The injuries to their heads were so severe that they had died almost instantly. The fourth of the teens, Niels, was found outside of the tent with broken facial bones and stab wounds. Niels was the only survivor of the attack, and he stated afterwards that he had seen a glimpse of an attacker in a black hoodie coming for them. He didn't remember anything else, most likely from the brain damage that he had suffered, so the police kinda had nothing to go off. It turned out that the killer had not injured the victims from inside of the tent. Instead, the killer had attacked the teenagers from outside through the sides of the tent with a knife and an unidentified instrument, which is believed to have been a rock. What's strange to me is that 2 people were found outside of the tent, so how did they get there? Did they just wake up and stumble out, and in that case, why was Mila naked from the waist down? Mila had also been stabbed many times after her death and had also suffered the worst injuries, so it almost seems like she was the main person of the attack. The murder weapons have never been located or found, and Neil's shoes were found hidden about 500 meters from the murder site. The police made major errors in the investigation, which I kinda don't blame them for, since these kind of crimes are super rare in Finland and especially during this time, so they were probably just not prepared at all. They didn't, for example, block off the crime scene and pretty much just let people come and go as they wished. A pillowcase with sperm from an unknown man was found at the crime scene, but it's unknown if it had anything to do with the crimes committed. This pillowcase was not owned by any of the victims and the owner has never been found. There were, however, 2 possible owners for it, but these people have never been arrested in connection to the case. Despite extensive investigation, the killer has actually never been found, and many different theories and suspects have been presented over the years. And I have tried to collect the information as clear as possible, but there are many different people involved, so I hope that it's not too messy. Many locals suspected a man who was living nearby who was a kiosk keeper known to have been hostile towards strangers. Campers visiting his kiosk said that he was very hostile towards them and was known for being violent and cutting down tents around the area. He even threw rocks at people who came to his street, and some believed that he had just simply snapped and committed the murders. So he was therefore initially a suspect, and according to statements, someone saw him coming back from the murder scene but was too afraid to contact the police. Police did, however, never really find any hard evidence against him, and they also never took his DNA for testing. He was also said to have confessed to the murders, but the police kinda didn't believe him since they believed he was a bit disturbed. And his wife also claimed that he had been in bed with her on the night of the murders. The interesting part of this is that he actually drowned in the Lake Bodom in 1969, most likely by suicide, which kinda makes me believe that maybe he was feeling guilty and therefore decided to commit suicide there. Another suspect in the case was a man called Pentti Soininen. He was a violent criminal who confessed to a fellow convict that he had committed the murders. He lived pretty close to the Bodom Lake at the time of the murders, and he actually ended up hanging himself in prison on the 9th anniversary of the murders. There's only one factor speaking strongly against the fact that he was involved, and that's his age. At the time of the attack, he would have been only 14 years old, and many people believe that it would have been impossible for such a young person to overpower 4 teenagers alone. But considering the fact that they were all sleeping, I kinda feel like it could have been possible, honestly. But there was really no other evidence against him, and for some reason it's pretty common for criminals to commit to murders that they have never done. One of the biggest suspects in the case was a man who was living only a few kilometers from the shore of Lake Bodom, and his name was Hans Assmann. Hans was a German businessman described having a restless personality, and he lived in Finland for about 10 years. He was actually in prison for a while in Finland, serving a sentence for abusing his wife. On the morning of the murders, Hans showed up at a hospital in Helsinki with bloody clothes and dirty hands. The doctors in the hospitals who treated Hans were sure that he must be the man who committed the murders, as he was acting pretty strange, for example washing his hands over and over. Hans was also blonde and would therefore match the description of the man seen at the crime scene. 3 years after the murders, the police started investigating him. He was connected to 11 different murders, and one of them was a murder in Sweden of 2 girls camping, similar to this case. This was, however, never really taken seriously by the police, since he had an alibi for the night of the Bodom murders and was also in Germany during the time of another murder that he was suspected of committing. Plus, there was just simply not enough evidence against him. Hans Assmann died in 1998, and he was during this time living in Sweden. His girlfriend at the time of his death later stated that their relationship was platonic and he could rage very easily. She also stated that there is a possibility that Hans committed the murders, but he never admitted anything to her. But I just feel like if his girlfriend said that he could have possibly killed 3 teenagers, then he must have been a pretty bad man, honestly. And that basically makes it more possible that he was involved in the case. Nils Gustafsson was put under hypnosis and asked about the events in as much detail as possible. Having recalled what the attacker looked like, there was a composite sketch made of a man, and I will insert it in the video. He described the man as having big eyes, light skin with light hair. He was also described being between 20 and 30 years old with an average body type, a high wrinkled forehead and a firm jaw. As clothes, he was wearing a buttoned-up shirt and a sweater with several colors including black and green. Later, during one of the Bodom victims' funerals, someone took a picture that showed a man looking a lot like the composite sketch. The identity of this mysterious man in the photo remains unknown, but some people believe that the strange figure was Hans Assmann because he looked a lot like the sketch made and was overall a sketchy person. Other sources stated that Hans Assmann never attended the funeral, so it's not possible, but in reality, how could they know for sure? In that case, who is the man in the photograph? Personally, I think that both the composite sketch and the photograph taken looks a lot like Hans, which just makes me more suspicious of him. There was also 2 men fishing in the lake who were suspicious. These were 2 unknown men who had been seen fishing at the Bodom lake at the night of the murders, and these men never reported who they were to the police, despite the police requesting the men to come forward many times. And the men also left their fish at the shore. This is definitely suspicious, and the fact that they just left their fish at the shore after fishing kind of makes me feel like maybe they saw something and got scared, and maybe that's why they never came forward to the police, because it makes them look like cowards, or did they possibly have something to do with the murders? I don't know. I do also want to add that some people believe that these men fishing were Seppo and Niels, as they had been fishing in the lake that night, but according to Niels they were never fishing in that part of the lake. So the biggest suspect in the case, and also the most controversial suspect, is Nils Gustafsson himself. When the police found Nils at the crime scene, he was in bad shape with bruises, a concussion, and a broken jaw. He did, however, not remember anything from the attack except for the person that he described. In late March 2004, so around 44 years after the murders, when Nils was 62 years old, he was arrested for the murders. It was believed that Nils had been drunk and gotten into some sort of rage, possibly some kind of jealousy towards his girlfriend Mila, and the fight escalated into him committing the 3 murders. Another source stated that the motive for the attack was that he had tried to have sex with Mila, who rejected him, and then he just lost his mind. Now this would kinda explain her injuries, as she had the worst injuries of them all, and she was also naked from the waist down. The trial started on the 4th of August 2005. Nils' defense lawyer argued that the murders were the work of 1 or more outsiders, and that Nils would have been incapable of killing 3 people given the extent of his own injuries. The prosecution said that Nils had committed the murders, hid the items, injured himself, and then went back to the tent where he pretended to be unconscious. Modern DNA analysis was important for the prosecution, as it showed that the 3 murdered victims' blood was on Nils' shoes, proving that the shoes had been worn during the attack, and this would most likely have been Nils, since why would a random attacker just put on Nils' shoes before committing the murders? The prosecution also attempted to claim that the tall blonde man seen at the crime scene by the birdwatchers was possibly Nils. On the 7th of October 2005, Nils was acquitted of all charges due to the prosecution's evidence being inconclusive, failure to show that he had a motive, and due to the time that had elapsed since the murders. The state of Finland also paid him around 45,000 euros for the mental suffering caused by the long time in custody. But that's all the information that I had for this case, and unfortunately it's a case that might never be solved. I just feel like there are so many possibilities, like it could have literally been all of the suspects. I personally feel like it was probably Hans. I mean, he was just a creepy guy, and the fact that he showed up at the hospital bloody, combined with the fact that he pretty much fits into everyone's description of the killer. I mean, the composite sketch, the man seen at the crime scene, to me it's just likely that he had something to do with it. I just wonder what the motive could be, like why kill 3 innocent teenagers? And also, why did Mila suffer the most in the attack? That's probably the only factor that makes me believe that Niels could have possibly been involved in the crime, because she was naked from the waist down and she was also found with the most injuries, which makes it seem like it was some kind of personal attack towards her. And of course, the fact that Niels' shoes was worn in the attack, that's also pretty suspicious to me, honestly. The problem for me with the Niels theory is that how could he have hidden the murder weapons? I just feel like the murder weapons would have most likely been found if Niels was the one committing the murders. But then again, the police did not really tape off the crime scene, so anything could have happened really. But I will wrap up the video here. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that I will see you in my next case. Goodbye everyone.